doing it?
Me.
Hello. I feel like I'm too far away.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Lift, Perform, Compete podcast. Isabel Wolf here, and I'm joined with Ed Haynes and Patrick James. Hi guys.
Hi Isabel.
Hello.
Hi Patrick.
Hello, Ed.
How are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm great, thanks for asking. Isabel, how are you doing today?
Don't lie, Ed, we're not great. We are.
Actually, no, we're a bit.
We're a bit hasty today.
We should be honest there. What do we do?
So we've taken some, I don't know what they're gonna, what are they?
They're adaptogen mushrooms. So they're not, if you're hearing mushrooms and you're not as naive as I am previously.
Are you struggling today?
Yep.
I was a little bit, yeah. So basically, the brand is called Alpha. Oh, we're gonna put it in the notes.
Yeah.
Because I was ready to plug Alpha something.
Well, anyways, we came in to the gym this morning and we were just like, Ed was like, I need a coffee, and I was like, I want to try these Ignite mushrooms, and he's like, yeah, let's do it. So we made some tea, had some mushrooms. An hour later, my heart was on fire.
Yeah. So basically, it is one of this guy's he's been on podcast before, Brian Lai.
Yeah.
A big breathing expert, Wim Hof guy, and he has actually helped create a mushroom company. And so he's given me 3 different types of mushrooms to try. One is reishi, which is basically used if you want to kind of meditate or calm the nervous system, so put yourself into a parasympathetic state. The other one is essentially lion's mane, which is a well-known kind of mushroom that most folks will take if they want to focus. So if you're going to sit down and do a big stint of work, that's what you take. What we took, Isabel, was Ignite today, which is a vasodilator. So basically helps send blood supply to the working tissues, and it's kind of like a pre-workout, a natural pre-workout. So Izzy made a couple of green teas. By the way, the first time Izzy has ever made tea in her life. And so when I say she made tea, she boiled a kettle, which is actually also the first time that you've ever boiled water in a kettle. And then she put a tea bag in a mug, which is also the first time she'd ever done that. And she sprinkled some of this mushroom powder in there. And then we were doing PD, and at the last kind of 15 minutes, I felt my heart rate just exponentially rising. And by the time
It was
training time, I think I'd already peaked, to be honest.
I should have had a coffee with it, but to be honest, I had a really great 2 sessions today, but now I'm like on the down.
I feel like I was on a come down 10 minutes into my session, I feel.
Just to clarify, listeners, they're not the magic strain of
we
mushrooms.
have to strain.
They're
just
legal mushrooms.
legal mushrooms.
Anyway,
cool.
just check out the comments, folks, because we will put the brand, and I love it. I've been experimenting a lot more with reishi, the calming one. I use that at night time, and I'm a massive advocate for it. So we'll put the brand in if you're interested in checking them out. Check them out.
Cool. Anyway, so we're here gonna bring back the Q&As. We're just gonna have a totally random fun one. We have a bunch of questions that you guys have sent in. We're gonna go through them, and Patty and Ed are just gonna feed off of each other and hopefully give you some insight to some of the things that you guys are curious about. Are you guys ready?
So ready.
Okay, cool. Let's start off with nutrition. Before bed snacks, yes or no?
I mean, myself and Paddy were talking about this before. We really wanted to say it depends before every single answer, but we're not going to do that. I think, remember, every single meal, every single bit of food that goes into your mouth has to be a part of a bigger macro plan, right? So if a snack fits in with your daily caloric intake and aligns with your goals or whatever you're trying to achieve, then yes, I think a couple of things to think about though is be conscious as to, I'm answering this really fast like I want an IG Q&A. That's the time I normally do. That's a normal time. That's what I normally do in Q&A. So I'll slow it down a bit. Just be conscious about the last meal that you have. Firstly, from a digestive standpoint, generally speaking, give yourself a bit of time before bedtime is wise in terms of optimal digestion, but also in terms of circadian rhythms. We've talked about this in the past, and in terms of melatonin, which is the hormone that gets released at night time, typically responds better. Because remember that our circadian rhythm is built around the time that we train, the time we drink liquid, the time we eat, the time we expose ourselves to light, and potentially throwing in late night snacks and meals can just throw off your circadian rhythms, which may possibly delay sleep. So anything to add on that, Paddy?
The only thing I would say, just going off what you said about circadian rhythm, is that And with snacking, it's that your body gets used to whatever it is that you're doing to it. So if that is a bedtime snack and you've done that for 2 years, you try and take away those snacks, initially it's going to be hard to do, and you're going to feel like, oh, I need that snack. When actually, give yourself the opportunity to experiment in the window. If you are someone that's a bedtime snacker and you feel that that's maybe pushing you out of your macro target or out of your calorie target, then try it for an extended period of time where you're not snacking and you're having a larger bedtime meal, and your body will most probably adapt to it and adjust to it rather than craving that bedtime snack that you need.
For sure, I think and this is good because I'm now feeding off you. Excuse me, I'm talking about snacking. Carbohydrate intake as well is shown to help the release of melatonin. So more dense carbohydrates at night time actually can help induce good sleep. And I think as well, just the choice of food. Going for easily digestible foods is probably a better idea late at night. So a big, sirloin steak 30 minutes before bedtime, which has 5 to 6 hours of assimilation before you're actually getting the protein, is probably not a good idea before bedtime. Something like oats, banana, or an easy digestible protein like a lot of people take casein, which is a pre-digested protein powder, which requires very little breakdown in the digestive system, would be better options.
Yeah.
Do you guys have bedtime snacks?
At the moment, I'm not snacking much. I'm intentionally backloading quite a bit of calories in the evening. I personally get the hungriest bedtime.
Me too.
Like I can deal with hunger at like at 10 o'clock or at 3 o'clock or whatever because I'm working, I'm busy. When it gets to 8 o'clock at night and I'm hungry, I'm on my own, I'm just watching TV or winding down or whatever, that's danger time for me. Deliveries coming out, running to M&S,
Stealing pizzas.
That's a story for the podcast.
Yeah, I'm not really a snacker in general at all, to be honest. I'm quite regimented with kind of 3 meals and a post-workout shake. But like Paddy, I stack the majority of my calories in my dinner. But certainly, I normally try to eat dinner around 6:30, 7. And I know if I eat dinner at 7:30, 8, it affects my sleep. But again, going back to what Paddy said, that's just because my rhythm has been so used to eating at the same time for so long. I could adjust to the 7:30, 8 p.m. dinner time and probably cope fine. It just takes some time to adjust.
Yeah.
Cool, let's stay on the nutrition track. Someone asked brown or white rice?
So this is nice to feed off considering we were just talking about again. This is nice to feed off considering we were talking about a couple of percent again.
Just repeat it yourself.
We were talking about digestion and easily digestible and not easily digestible. And the main thing that we talk about in terms of brown versus white rice is the fiber content. And we basically had a discussion about this before we started recording. And you want to make sure that you're eating the right sort of carbohydrates, which the majority of, rice is pretty much exclusively carbohydrates. You could argue that fiber is a macronutrient as well. But yeah, brown rice has essentially got a lot of fiber, whereas white rice doesn't have anywhere near as much fiber. So that fiber slows down the digestion process. And if we're talking about the type of carbohydrate that we want at a specific time, let's take dinner for example, you might want a slower processing carbohydrate, therefore brown rice might be a better option. Whereas post-workout, an hour after you work out, you're still sensitive, your body is more likely to store carbohydrate as glycogen in muscle and in the liver, and having an easily digestible carbohydrate in that situation is probably better, i.e. white rice.
Yeah, nailed it. And the same goes for kind of white potato versus sweet potato. The actual carbohydrate quantity in the same amount of white rice versus brown rice is the same, but just in terms of the uptake as to how quickly you can access that carbohydrate, that's the difference between white and brown. But I think going back to kind of the nutritional pyramid that we often refer to, if you're not consistently hitting calories, if you don't have some idea of where your macronutrients are, how important is things like meal timing? Not that important. So I wouldn't stress over it. If you're someone who is really dialed in with your training, nutrition and lifestyle, then that's an extra variable you can start to explore later down the line. But for most folks, I wouldn't say it matters.
Yeah, just going off on a tangent a little bit, an analogy that I've used in the past that I quite like is imagining a jar and filling up the jar with large pebbles and small pebbles. We take the large pebbles being things like your calorie intake, your macronutrients, and then the much smaller pebbles are things like nutrient timing, etc.
Supplementation.
Yeah.
Most of us here go for the white rice.
I'm a white rice guy for sure. Just don't like the taste of brown
I
rice.
like white rice. It's like sticky white rice.
I actually quite like brown rice with like a chili sometimes. It's nice. Bit of extra chew.
We're gonna have to try your version of the brown rice then.
Okay.
Okay, continuing on nutrition. Kilogram of protein per body weight for training and rest days. What are your take on this?
I think there's lots of pieces to break down with this. I think maybe you should start by just quickly talking about protein as a macronutrient.
Yeah, so in terms of guidelines, I think the general literature is somewhere between, in terms of a daily quantity, is 1.4 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So that is a ballpark that you'll be aiming to.
Per pound, per kilogram?
Per kilogram.
Well, I always thought 1 to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight.
So yeah, so if you take like 1.4 kilograms, that's close. Yeah. So it's quite a large bracket. For me personally, I like to shoot for 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. You've got to remember that not all of your protein sources throughout the day are like quality protein sources, or they're not. You don't have all the amino acids in them, so they're not as and they haven't got the right amino acid breakdown or as better profile.
Profile.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say. So you've got to bear in mind things like peas. Like, for example, a bagel actually has like 9 or 10 grams of protein in it, but isn't the same protein as a steak or a piece of chicken or a piece of fish or whey protein or something like that, because of its amino acid profile. So I like to shoot for 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. It's a nice easy target to hit, and it covers the basis. With protein, it's probably better to overshoot than it is to undershoot, because it's a really important macronutrient.
Yeah, I'd say before we talk about rest days versus non-rest days, it's important, for people who are listening to that, that's something Paddy's worked up to over the years, to be able to tolerate that amount of protein and be successful with it. Really important, we talked about this on past podcasts with Simone Arthur and Frankie Mastriani, is that you need to start by recognizing where you're at right now with your protein intake, and creating a slow strategic plan to get to the target wherever you want to get to. And again, there is a lot of literature to support these ratios. However, there are always anomalies to the rule. We've had James Newbury on this podcast who eats a plant-based diet, and he gets not even 0.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and he's one of the best CrossFitters in the world. So it's important to note that guidelines are always important, and it's important to experiment yourself and see what works, but there is definitely no kind of golden rule for everyone. Let's talk about rest days versus training days. My first question to you then, Paddy, is does your caloric intake, and specifically protein intake, differ between training days and rest days?
So I try and go roughly, I try and reduce my calories in general, but I would keep my protein the same, I would keep my fats the same, and the only thing that I would move is my carbohydrates. And I know that there's a lot of, people would say that on the rest day you actually want to be eating maybe more, so that you can essentially load up extra carbohydrates to then recover better. You have better glycogen stores for your next day of training, if we're talking someone that's specifically wanting to dial in their nutrition for performance. But for me at the moment, I'm actually trying to lean out a little bit. So for me, being in a calorie deficit is what I'm trying to do 7 days a week. It's not always going to plan, but
1 week on, 1 week off.
Yeah. So for me, just trying to get especially in a calorie deficit, it's important to make sure you're hitting a decent level of protein to maintain, to stay satiated, to maintain muscle mass, etc. So I try and hit my protein target on my rest days exactly the same as I do on my training days. The only thing that I change is my carbohydrate.
Question for you then on appetite on rest days. Do you notice any differences on days when you rest versus days when you're training on how hungry you are?
Yeah, I'd probably say, I would say noticeable difference in my appetite. Like after maybe like an hour to 2 hours after I've trained, and my protein shake has started digesting whatever, I start to get like a really aggressive hunger. and that sort of intensity of hunger doesn't hit me the same on a rest day. I always get hungry at about 10 o'clock, regardless of whether I've trained or haven't, but in that afternoon spike after I would have trained normally, I usually get really hungry, but on my rest day that doesn't happen.
So for me in that experience, because I also recently just became plant-based, like Patty, I don't have to, but it's recommended that I get all my protein every day of the week because it's not as much, I don't go through that formula of the 1 pound per body weight, but I am able to it's lenient for me because obviously we have different problems. Mine is hitting the calorie is difficult for me. I'm usually under eat. So my nutritionist allows me the flexibility of the day before rest day to not hit my carbohydrate target, but on rest day I should because we want to perform the next day.
Yeah.
So that's where we differ in.
I think something that definitely weighs into that decision on, potentially going less, reducing calories like you are, Paddy, on rest day, and you going over. It also depends on, what your training schedule looks like. If someone has 2 rest days in a row, it may make sense a little more to kind of reduce calories because you're not necessarily prepping for the next day. For me, I actually just keep it pretty much flatlined every single day of the week. Try and more or less hit exactly the same amount of protein intake, exactly the same amount of carbohydrate intake. But the interesting thing for me is that I'm actually hungry on my rest days. And I think a big thing for me is that on a training day, which is also a work day, generally in a bit of a fight or flight response throughout the day, so the sympathetic system is generally a little bit more activated. I'm definitely a bit more busy. I've got a hard training session somewhere in there as well. And I think when the sympathetic system is activated, we're a little bit less in tune with how we're feeling, and hunger can be one of those things that kind of gets neglected. That's why people in competitions, for example, often aren't hungry at all when they're competing. And it's not until the competition finishes at the end of the day they suddenly have this insatiable appetite to get all the food back in. So on days when I'm resting, I'm actually more hungry. And so for me, reducing my calories on my rest day actually wouldn't fit with my appetite on those days as well. So just
it depends is the answer.
I think, we can dive into a million rabbit holes, especially with nutrition. I think the most important thing is for you to experiment with yourself and figure out what works for you. Every human body is different, appetites, like plant-based, meat-based, whatever it is. There's so many different variables. Just experiment with one thing, see how it works, see how you feel.
Stick with it, 2 to 4 weeks, don't change it, monitor, track results, and then make a decision on what the next intervention should be.
Exactly.
Agreed. You used the word, so let's go to that question next. Which foods are most satiating? Is foods even a word? Which food is?
Food groups, maybe.
Which food is?
So generally speaking, protein is responsible for satiety. Satiety is basically the feeling of being full. So actually it's funny, Paddy, we talked about this with your breakfast not that long ago.
Yeah.
You were finding that you were eating a pretty big breakfast and kind of an hour later you were just ravenous. You felt like the breakfast hadn't touched the sides. And when we kind of dived into your breakfast, you were having
whey isolate.
Yeah, whey isolate. So basically a pre-digested protein supplement as a protein source. So 1 scoop of protein, let's say it's 30 grams of protein, would technically be the same as 4 or 5 egg whites, for example.
Yeah.
Right, but the only difference is the protein powder, because it's pre-digested, assimilates and absorbs much, much quicker than the eggs. It almost goes straight into the bloodstream in about 30 to 40 minutes. And so protein in that case wasn't serving its role of satiating it, so we just get really, really hungry later. So, and often, what that can lead to is like overeating, binging, snacking. And so that's, I think, why protein is such an important macronutrient on top of everything you've already said, is that it can actually give us that feeling of feeling full for longer.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one thing you've got to bear in mind with protein is there's the thermic effect of feeding. So essentially your body is breaking that down for a long period of time, like we talked about previously, that a piece of steak can take like 5-6 hours for that to be broken down. That's essentially your body's digestive system, your body breaking that down for that period of time. You're much less likely to, you smash a packet of crisps, that might curb your hunger for 20 minutes, half an hour. It's easy for your body to just get rid of that, and it takes a long time for your body to get rid of to get rid of 300, 200 grams of red meat. So, again, food choices is an important thing. Protein is at the top of that.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's wrap up the nutrition questions with one mandatory change or habit with nutrition that you would advocate for anyone across the board, regardless of goals?
I'm happy to kick this off because I actually made a pretty, and I knew the science, and I knew I should have been doing this forever, but I think I should save the story. Fuck it, let's talk about the story.
Cool.
This is no longer safe for kids.
Well, I didn't do that.
So my story was that I got offered a free colonic irrigation
Nice.
when I was in Thailand in 2000, many years ago, whenever we last travelled. And so as I had this tube up my bottom, and water was getting flushed into my stomach, and then it was obviously pulling out everything from my stomach. I could see everything flying through this tube into this basically big container. I also had two ladies assisting me with this for an hour. One was rubbing coconut oil on my belly.
No way.
Yeah, and the other just kept her hand next to my anus as she held next to my bum. So basically, I was given the option: would you like to do this unassisted or assisted? And I thought, I don't know how comfortable I'm gonna be sticking the pipe up there myself and sitting there for an hour. So I'll take the assistance. I didn't obviously realise the assistance was going to be two chicks there.
With the coconut oil.
Rubbing coconut oil and telling me to relax for an hour. But anyway, the point of the story is that as I watched the contents empty my stomach or leave my stomach, the first thing they both said was, "You're not chewing your food." It's clear, like none of last night's meals and yesterday's breakfast have been digested. In which case, you may be eating, a nice balanced diet that fits your macronutrients and calories, but you're hardly absorbing any of it because you're just swallowing. And I was always kind of proud of being a fast eater. And so since then, I've really made a conscious effort to chew my food and deliberately slow down the time it takes to actually start and finish a meal. And I've noticed, just general things I've noticed is improvements in like stool consistency, quality, don't get indigestion anywhere near as much. Those are two main things I've been noticing, but I also know because of science of actually being able to absorb foods and how important that is. I would say chewing your food to most people is where we miss the mark a lot.
Nice. I would say, we talk about the big pebbles in the jar, whatever. Most important is going to be calorie intake. And for a lot of people, their goal is to be leaner, fat loss, which requires a calorie deficit. And having gone through phases of calorie deficits in the past, one thing that I have found that's worked well for me is waiting once you finish the meal. I find it very easy to kind of like, I'll eat like you, I have it in the past eaten very fast, and I actually still do. This is something I'm trying to deal with at the moment, but I just love like eating food really quick. Like if it's good tasting food, I just want to eat it. Like I just want it to go in my mouth.
Or if it's boiling hot, I want to get it in my mouth whilst it's still hot.
Yeah, exactly. I like to microwave my food for about 10 minutes, guys. That's what Ed's referring to there.
He takes it out after 5 and leaves the microwave running for an extra 5 minutes.
I've completely forgot my point. Oh, I know what I was going to say.
Taking your time after you go.
Yes, so let your food sit in as it's being digested. Obviously 10 minutes isn't, your food hasn't digested by that point, but your appetite, your body, those hunger signals take a little bit of time to kind of move away. I've found in the past that I've eaten a meal and then it's instantly I've been like, oh, I'm still hungry, and then I've gone and smashed more food that I didn't need to eat, and then 10 minutes later I feel bloated and I'm like, oh no, I've eaten too much. But if you eat the meal that you've set out to eat, which is kind of your standard dinner or whatever, it's within your calorie target, eat your meal, get up, like walk around for a little bit, go wait 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then if you're still hungry at that point, maybe you haven't eaten enough, or you're just being greedy. Good one.
I'm just gonna slide myself into this conversation. I would say that, I'm the world's slowest eater, so I can't relate to what you guys are saying. It takes me forever to eat a lunchbox,
And then you don't finish it.
and then I probably won't finish it. But I would say something that we implemented this year as part of our goals that weren't training related is, and I would recommend because it's really changed my life, I've now implemented it for my dinner as well, not just lunch, is to eat your food away from a screen. Like any sort of screen, like even television or something like that. Like, especially I used to eat my lunch in front of the computer and just straight from training, hop onto the computer with my laptop is my computer, with my lunchbox I meant, and just do work while eating. And it would be like 2 hours, my lunchbox would still be there. And like now I purposely have to take my lunchbox outside and just eat, and not only do I get to calm down and relax from the training session or anything that I've done, it could be work related, but you just enjoy your food a little bit more and you're able to like calm yourself, and then when you're ready to go back into whatever you were doing, you're just that much more ready. And I think
I think a big part of that as well is that you need to honor and give your body the space and time it needs and energy it needs to actually digest food. And if you're you got your head in your laptop and you're answering emails and doing work, that's a stressor. There's another stressor that your body's having to take on, let alone having to digest a big meal of food. So to optimize digestion, it's also recommended that just concentrate on chewing and enjoying the meal.
Yeah, cool. Let's step away from nutrition. That's actually quite a lot of questions on nutrition, and let's go into training related-ish questions. So, first one, will Masters athlete season look like the individual athletes you outlined in our last podcast where we talked about the 2022 season?
Okay, so I think we need some context here. We also have been talking a lot, and we did it in the Trust in the Process vlog. I know I put a post on Instagram. We shared some videos with our process training community and last week's podcast where we're basically talking about what the season looks like. And we have a number of different groups here. We've got the Live, Perform, Compete and Elite. We're specifically talking about Perform, Compete and Elite because all those three groups are prepping for the CrossFit season. And we basically mapped out month by month what the training program would roughly look like, when they need to be starting to kind of think about competition, when they're doing phases of less intense training, when they're doing phases of more intense training. So where the Masters fits into this is if we use last year's calendar and we assume that's what next year's going to look like. We know that the Masters qualifiers, they're going to qualify through stage 1 of the Open, but then they need to be peaking for when the Masters qualifiers actually take place, which is actually about 3 to 4 weeks after the quarterfinals. So what the peaking structure would look like for a Masters athlete, it would basically look very similar to our Compete program. So we're basically kind of peaking for not stage 1 of the CrossFit Open, but assuming they're going to make it to the Masters qualifiers, they need to be at their best about 6 to 8 weeks after the CrossFit Open. So yeah, basically everything we talked about for the Compete program, only delaying that a little bit more. They're going to get into the most intense forms of training kind of around about when the Open starts. Whereas someone who's looking to peak at stage 1 of the CrossFit Open, their most intense training is going to be about 1 to 2 months before the CrossFit Open. Anything to add, Kelly?
Nothing.
Cool. So we obviously talk a lot about RPE and we implement it a lot in all of our training programs. That's rate of perceived exertion. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
Oh, yes. Okay, so one of the questions, I have it a lot in my training, let's be real. Let's go into the question, which is how do I gauge if my RP is actually as was intended?
Yeah, so one way that I like to put it across to people is as a percentage, which a lot of people seem to understand. If you're talking about aerobic work, and a lot of the time that's where we're, particularly on our Tuesday sessions on the process program, we like to do aerobic Tuesday. It's large, sort of 20, 30, 40 minutes worth of aerobic bouts, not in one go, obviously split up. We like to talk about athletes rating their perceived exertion during, after each AMRAP or period of time that they're working. And a lot of people are kind of like, what is a 6 or what is a 7? It's like, imagine yourself at 50% of your capacity. What does or maybe work yourself backwards, what does 100% of your capacity look like? You're running away from a bear.
Yeah, and you can't sustain it. That's what I would put number 10 as, a 10 out of 10 with aerobic training. Like, you just can't hold this pace for any longer.
Yeah, and then you can just work yourself backwards from there. What does 90% look like, or what does it feel like? What does 80%? And as you get better at kind of like, using the RPE and you kind of assessing yourself, how you're feeling, you get better at being able to put yourself in one of those brackets. If you only use it sporadically, you're not going to be that in tune with your body. If you ask yourself after each AMRAP, how do I feel out of 10 right now? Do I feel a 5? Do I feel a 6? Do I feel like I've got 30% left in the tank? Do I feel like I've got 20% left in the tank? Are my hands on my knees when I'm at an RP of 6 out of 7? Probably not. If I'm breathing really heavily, and you can use things like heart rate to gauge that as well. But there's lots of different ways that you can gauge it. The way I like to do it for a layman is to ask yourself as a percentage, and then you can, once you get more in tune with that, you can start thinking about how your body reacts, how your body feels in those different RPEs out there.
Yeah, nice. I think the biggest thing there is it is all about awareness and recognition. Like it's something you need to practice. And I think when first exposing people to RPE, if they've never done it before, always ask them to start on the side of conservative with their training. If you start your training, you just go straight away to your 10 out of 10s all the time. It becomes very hard to create a scaling system as to what's less than that. So it's better to start, doing less intense bouts of effort. And then as you start to increase intensity, you'll start to gain a little bit more awareness as to the different levels, especially kind of when you're working between 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I think, an RPE for aerobic training, like a 6 or 7 is still it's not easy work, it's still challenging, but people need to recognize there's a big difference between 9 and there's a big difference between 10. 10 is the place that we really rarely ever go to. For me, it's like in the open once a year. It's the only time I'm ever maybe going to go to a 10. Otherwise, the majority of my training year is going to be between kind of a 6 to 7 to an 8. It's interesting though, after our Aerobic Tuesday sessions, a question we always ask coaches when we finish each interval was like, hands up if that felt like a 6 out of 10. Hands up if it felt like a 7 out of 10. And pretty much every session, you'll get someone like, who feels like that was a 9 out of 10? And you'll see a few hands go up in the room. And I'm like, that was not a 9 out of 10. Yeah. They're on their feet, they're smiling, they're kind of drinking their water again. Like, yeah, that was a 9 out of 10. Like, you have never been to a 9 out of 10 just yet. But I mean, that's a whole part of it. It's like it's building that awareness. I think when it comes to strength training, it gets a little bit harder.
Well, to just let you know from experience, what I was going to say is, with strength training, what's helped me a lot recently, and I actually haven't told you this, is the new thing you've put in my program, which is the RIR.
Yeah, reps and reserve. Nice.
Yeah, so that's helped me understand a lot more what my RP is in strength, because I think like, if I have 4 left or 3 left, that means I'm at a 7 out of 10-ish, and that's how I feel, and that's how I gauge it. So like what you said, we're working backwards. That's what I do now with my strength. I'm like, could I have done 4 more perfect reps? I need to stop here. This is what was intended. I think that IR has really helped me a lot.
Yeah, and I think I've actually it was actually Casper on the last podcast. He brought the term RIR up, and I hadn't heard it in a really long time. Because he deals with athletes predominantly in strength and hypertrophy training. He's not really doing much energy system training. So that for him is his way to basically use an RPE scale when his clients are lifting weights. And I thought it was great. I was like, that's actually way more understandable for someone, because if anyone who's been in weight training, like you lift a weight, like how many more reps do you think you could have done? Most people are gonna know. It's basically like I could have done 1, 2, or like 5 or more.
Yeah.
That's generally the metric system. And for most of us, like at the start of the training cycle, we want to be leaving plenty in the tank. And as we get closer to testing, we do less and less. And I've actually moved away from RPEs and percentages, which I've used a lot in the past, to prescribe the effort that I like from a client, and I'm actually using RIR.
It's been very helpful for me, especially in our new block when we're trying to build it up. At first I was like, I don't really get it. Could I have done 4 more? I don't know, and now it's way better.
And I would just going off that, like I would say that most probably the reason why is because you're using it a lot, and you've got better understanding of what what two reps in reserve feels like for a bicep curl, and what 2 reps in reserve feels like for a back squat after you've done 8 previous reps. It will feel different, but you're just accumulating that data, and like we were talking about your own personal awareness of what it feels like when your quads are about to fatigue, or when your biceps are about to fatigue. It's just awareness of yourself.
Yeah, and I think everyone should be including this subjective data in their training logs. After every set, every exercise, what was that out of 10, or how many reps in reserve did you have? And it's a great way to start building awareness.
Cool. So going on with the awareness and knowing yourself a little bit more as an athlete, let's answer the question of finding balance between self-regulating and holding back too much.
I feel like this is your.
This is an Ed Haynes question.
Well, actually, I'm probably pretty good at on the opposite side of it, to be honest. So, you go first.
Yeah, so I think it is a really tough one. I think it's the context first for the listeners is that self-regulation, basically the concept is listening to your body and giving your body what it has to give on any particular day. So maybe a fatigued, a tired, a stressed body can't handle as much as a physically primed body. And there's so many factors that go into that: life, sleep, nutrition, diet, stress, etc. And so I think the question's asking is like, often for people, and I'm guilty of this actually, I kind of talked about this on the podcast. This is what happened to me last season. I was really kind of exploring self-regulation, and I was using the Whoop as well. The Whoop was actually a really good tool at helping me self-regulate, because I was basically adjusting the intensity and volume of my sessions based upon how recovered my Whoop was telling me it was. But I think what actually started to happen was that I was actually undercooking the intensity and volume a little bit. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually think it's a much better place to be. Doing a little bit less intensity and a little bit less volume over the long term is much better than doing too much volume and too much intensity. But the only, obviously, the kicker is that you may not be giving your body enough stimulus to actually move it forward. Now, remember, submaximal volume and submaximal intensity is still going to get you better. There is obviously a sweet spot. There's a sweet spot where you want to give your body just the right amount of intensity, just the amount of right volume to accelerate and progress at the best and fastest rate without overreaching. And I guess that's what training is. It's you constantly trying to find where is that sweet spot. And so I guess to answer the question, like, it's not a bad thing if you do find that you're undercooking it. That's actually a good place to be. And the only way I could answer the question is that the only way you're going to know if you're over or if you're undercooking your training is that you're going to need to push and see what happens. There is literally no other way to know it. There's no magic number. There's no amazing, things like the Whoop do help for sure, but it's just data. Like, there's just so many things that can affect what you have to give in a given day. So, essentially what I would do is that I would spend most of my week, and I still do this now, working sub-maximally, and maybe once or twice a week I'll push the intensity a little bit. For us, that's our Saturday testers. So when I jump into that, I'm actually saying to myself, okay, take a bit of a risk here, do a pace that's a little bit uncomfortable, push it more than you have done Monday to Friday. And then it's just about monitoring week on, like, how am I actually feeling? And I typically find kind of 3 to 4 weeks into that setup is when I'll start to feel like, okay, I need to actually pull back a bit now. And that's exactly what deloads are. That's exactly what deloading in the training process is for. It's so you can push hard with your training and have these strategic pullbacks in intensity and volume to allow you to kick on again in the future. Of course, if you just keep everything sub-maximal, you may actually never need to deload.
Yeah, I think what you were touching on there is the importance of having a structure and having a plan. And if you haven't got something mapped out, and like we were talking about the 2022 season in the previous podcast, talking about having accumulation phases, intensification phases, or even having 8-week periods or 12-week periods where you have structured out how you're looking to progress. You can understand your body better, or whether or not you're moving in the right direction. Now, if you were just going off and plucking out workouts and movements on a daily basis, just randomly, you're not really going to know if you're getting better, because you haven't got data to compare against from previous weeks, from what you did in the last 8-week block, etc. If you've got a plan in place, not saying that you need to follow it to the letter, but if you're working sub-maximally but the stimulus isn't enough, you'll be able to see over an 8 or a 12-week period how I got better. Not necessarily just from the data of lifted more kilos or whatever, like, am I moving better? Has my technique improved? All these other things, you can see whether or not you are improving over the course of a larger period, rather than just on a day-to-day. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's important to make sure that you have a plan in place, go off your day-to-day, how you're feeling, and if you're unsure whether the stimulus is enough, you want to make sure that you're just reviewing, like reflecting over an 8-week period, on a day-to-day, on a week basis. How has my training gone? Have I moved the needle a little bit further towards where my goal is? And we can talk about intentions and goals, diving into that again. Am I slowly moving better, or have I got worse, or am I staying the same? That if you think you're not working hard enough, or you're auto-regulating too much, then maybe you need to have a look and reflect on your data.
I mean, we actually did, for folks who want to understand this concept more, we actually did a whole podcast episode with Tammy talking about auto-regulation, so make sure you check out that episode.
Yeah, I think just as an athlete perspective, like, this is something that we also didn't see eye to eye on in the beginning, because you wanted me to pull back a lot and then we would build from there. So I think that's what we do now with every training cycle, which is structured, and I think that's what's helped a lot, because in the beginning of the week you reload, so you start by holding back and you auto-regulate, you self-regulate, you hold back, and each week you give yourself a little bit more, and then you're able to understand your threshold or like your signals. And I think that's something that's super important when you're talking about auto-regulating, is that you know your own body and you know your own signals, because then you'll be able to be like 2 weeks in, okay, what felt easy last week does not feel the same, or is you're not feeling stronger, which you should be if you're progressing, and then you can be like, now I need to hold back. You know what I mean? So it's all about finding your signals and knowing the awareness, so you know if you're holding back too much or pushing too much.
We can like literally go back and forth on this stuff forever, but go back to our podcast last week. This is where communication on the why behind your training program is so important, because an intention we'll talk about as well last week. But if you know that this is, let's say, an 8-week training cycle, and there is a deload in week 4 and week 7, that gives you the freedom to know, okay, I'm actually going to push it deliberately and potentially play with that fine line between overdoing it, because I know there is a scheduled break in the program. So it's it makes sense. Whereas if you're just kind of going day to day and not really having that foresight like you talked about, Patty, then that's I think where we run into issues.
Yeah, cool. Sticking on the training track, benefits or drawbacks of hand and feet positioning on the barbell for all lifting.
No, that's a rabbit hole we can go into for sure.
Okay,
Let's
so
not
I think we'll not rabbit hole it, but let's keep this specific to CrossFit. Okay, so rather than looking at kind of conventional weightlifting, we're talking about using the clean and jerk and the snatch variations in the sport of CrossFit. When might you play with different foot and hand positions, Paddy?
Let's look at, in a competition, for example, you might, let's take the last Saturday, we had a light power snatch in the workout. It was, light, heavy's relative, obviously, but for our compete and perform, they were a 35 kilo snatch, for 10 or 15 reps. Which for most people in that category is a relatively light snatch. Pretty light, should be able to cycle through at least 5s, 10s, maybe even unbroken pretty comfortably. In that situation, do you need to have your hands in your snatch grip position to be able to hit a 1 rep max like you were going to snatch 100 kilos? No. What are you thinking about in that position? You want to make sure that you're just cycling the bar efficiently, being able to pull it off the floor. Do you need to make contact with the bar? No. So all of these things you've got to bear in mind. In that situation, I would actually probably be taking my hands in. Allows me to not necessarily have to drop my bum so low in the start position, have my hands a little bit narrower, use a little bit of arm bend perhaps to bring the bar close to my hip, and then I'm probably not going to be making contact with the bar, coming back overhead and then cycling the bar nice and fast without having to have my hands too wide, dropping my hips too low in the start position.
And then similarly feet, like when we're lifting a heavy single or a heavy double, we're looking for footwork where the feet are basically moving into the squat position, but when we're cycling a light barbell, I typically start with the feet wide, keep them wide. Again, just gives me a bigger, stronger base of support. I'm not really extending that much because the weight's not heavy enough, so therefore I don't need footwork. We just minimize the amount of work that has to be done per rep. So I think that's a great case and point there, is that if we're typically doing things like lighter, moderate load barbell cycling, which is specific to the sport of CrossFit, typically we can play with a narrower hand position or different hand positions, as you say, and less footwork. But again, you've got to be able to flip the switch when you're doing heavy lifts, where technique becomes really, really important, because the 1%ers matter in that scenario. Then that's when moving back to maybe more conventional, wider grip, and we need to see footwork.
Yeah, and maybe diving into that a little bit, if I can. Is a lot of the reason why we talk about moving your feet from a pulling stance into a squatting stance is because those two stances should be a little bit different. They don't have to be, and you can look at a million weightlifters at Worlds and their feet positions stay the same, like Chinese lifters, a lot of them, their feet barely move off the ground. But in a lot of cases, you want to be in a narrower stance to be able to generate more power. And a really good way I think about that is, or ask people to, is you get them to stand underneath something really high. And you say, don't think about it, just jump. And you say stop just before they do it. Their feet are right underneath their hips, very close together. And that is a powerful position to be able to extend vertically, which is essentially what you're doing in statue.
Yeah, God, actually there's so much we can talk about. Squat, even where your feet move to, foot width is very dependent on the person. There could be mobility restrictions, there could be lever length that dictate. I know, Izzy, you have a wide squat. Actually, all three of us have a pretty wide squat.
Yeah.
I have quite a turned out foot because I've got rubbish ankles. Paddy, you've got quite a straight foot. These are all just individual nuances. In terms of where you put your hands on a bar can be dictated by how long your arms are, how short or long your torso is. There's just so many things that kind of factor into it.
And going back to what we keep saying, it depends on the person and what all that we can encourage you. Obviously, a coach might be able to help you steer you in the right direction, but if you haven't necessarily got access to that, or you aren't sure whether your technique is right, have a play around with moving your hands a little bit wider in the snatch, move your feet a little bit narrower, turn your feet out a little bit more. Whatever it is that you think that maybe you could change a little bit, try it, but try it for an extended period of time. Don't just do it for 1 week. I know, like you and I have both made significant changes, well, not significant changes in our snatch technique in the last couple of weeks for different reasons, and we're going to be persevering with those for an extended period of time. We're talking weeks, months, potentially even years before we look at changing it again. And that's something we would encourage people to do. Don't just do like a one rep max for one session and be like, oh, I did PB, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Give yourself time to be able to, your body to acclimatise to it and adjust to it.
Cool. So one more deep dive, quote unquote, question before we get into some quick fire, more personal experience questions. So you both just did a wonderful podcast on meditation. So someone has asked if there's anything else aside from meditation that you could recommend to stay present.
Well, I think that essentially meditation, a lot of it is focusing on the breath, and you don't need to classify it as meditation just to focus on your breathing and do some breathing exercises. But if you want to be more present in a situation, just pause for a second, which you could argue is meditation, you could argue it isn't. But if you feel yourself drifting off, or you start to pick up your phone and aimlessly go on social media, just pause for what you're doing, take a couple of deep breaths, and think about what it is that you're trying to achieve in the next 10 minutes. And this is something that that happens to me when I finish meditation, is that I would have just had Andy give me the spiel at the end of a meditation, saying whatever it is that you're going to do now, make sure that you apply it with 100% attention. And I'll finish the meditation and I'll be like, cool, pick up my phone and start like looking at WhatsApp or go on social media. It's just like, what? So it's just like, it's so easy to get distracted. But if you want to be present, just pause for a second and think about, what task am I wanting to achieve right now where I think I'm distracted? Whether that's something casual like watching a film and you keep looking at your phone, or whether that's you keep getting distracted by doing something else when you're trying to be working. Just pause for a second, have a couple of deep breaths, figure out what it is that you're trying to do, and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna go down the route of just slowing down, but I think as well, just telling yourself what the intention of whatever you're about to do, what is the intention? Why do you want to do it? So that could be, going back to what you were talking about, it could be eating. My intention now is just to eat my meal. It's not to turn on the television, it's not to be on my phone whilst eating, it's not to be watching the Euro highlights and catching up, which is what I did this morning. It's just I want to eat. And I think as you move through your day, we're just moving from different activities, different things always. And to kind of just have that, number one, that pause to slow down between as you transition from one thing to the next. And then number two is to say, well, what is my intention now? What do I actually want to achieve now? And the reason I'm saying that's so important is that often we go into activities without an intention. For example, I've got programming to do. I've got to write a client's program for next week. But, so I sat in front of the computer, I've opened up the program, that's, ready to get going. And then I have WhatsApp open on my computer, a message pops up, an email comes through. I don't have my headphones on, so someone in my team behind me asks me a question, and I turn around and engage in conversation. 30 minutes has gone by and I haven't started the program yet. And I think, then there's, what comes with setting the intention is then setting yourself up for success. So in that case, how can I set myself up for success so that in the next 20 minutes I'm just doing what I said I'm going to do, which is write the program. Okay, turn off WhatsApp, close my email. I put headphones on. Most of the time I'm not even listening to music, but I put my headphones on just so everyone else in the office knows that, like, okay, Ed's working, don't disturb him. Still do disturb him. Yeah.
Especially me.
Yeah. Basically, the team will start talking, trying to get my attention. I'll ignore them, and then they'll start slagging me off until eventually I bite on something. I turn around and like, oh, so you were listening anyway?
That's not my accent, by the way, guys.
I'll show you that.
Yeah, I think something else that you can touch on there is like the why behind you're doing something. Maybe ask yourself the consequences, or ask yourself why you are doing this thing. And that's something that we do with our clients. You know, we ask them about goals, and we want to dive into why is it that you want to do this, or why is it that you want to do that. And it's the same thing for, like, you know, if you're trying to build up a new habit, whether it's drinking more water. Why do I want to drink more water? Well, because it leads to this, and this. Okay, that's the reason why I'm doing it. Like, it's essentially the same as having the intention. It's like you're understanding the reason why you're doing something, because it triggers this, or it makes me feel better, or why do I go for a run on a Thursday? It's like, so I actually really enjoy running. And, you know, having that clear understanding of why you're doing something again will probably allow you to be more attentive when you're doing it.
So I recently started meditation for this reason. After I listened to you guys' podcasts, is because I feel like I'm one of the least present people. My mind is always so busy, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. And so I did start meditation, but one thing, like you said, is just eliminating distractions that could potentially pop up when you're trying to be present at something. And I think something that's really helped, and I've re-implemented it, my nutritionist is actually the person who suggested it to me, and then we got reiterated when we listened to the happiness hypothesis, which is writing things down. I now walk around in my backpack has just a notebook and a pen, and if I need to go outside to do work to eliminate distractions stuff, I'll bring my notebook and pen, just because if something comes to your mind, if you try to force yourself to let it go, the more it niggles into your mind. So write it down. Now it's gone. You'll deal with it later. You won't forget. And I think that's something that's been so helpful for me, especially this last month when anxiety has been high and all that kind of things. Now, any little thing, like even if you want to be present in the moment, but something like a to-do list pops up, at least you have your pen and paper. You write it down. You forget. Then you continue to stay present in that moment. So
Yeah, I like that.
That's been helpful. Cool. So let's go to some personal, quick fire-ish questions. Hopefully you guys won't go on and on for ages.
Personal, really.
Not that personal, but it's like your experiences. One thing that has helped you overcome injury to get back into the sport, because we both have dealt with.
Both cripples, yeah.
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 One thing. Okay. I think firstly, like seeking help and not trying to take it on yourself. You know, reach out to experts and build a plan. I think a plan is really important, and I think having kind of goals and benchmarks within that plan to work towards, just like any client working towards their goals, is really important. If you don't have those goals and those milestones to try to achieve, you can get lost, get really demotivated, feel like you're not progressing. And I think, yeah, just having a support network of people you can reach out to make sure that they're keeping you accountable. That's something that's always helped me in my process.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that as a number one. And then something else that I like that helps me is maybe working out a plan of how you can train around your injury. If I haven't trained for a week, I'll be like, oh no, I'm getting obese, or I'm going to lose all my gains or whatever it is, and just figuring out a way that you can incorporate X, Y, and Z into your training that doesn't stop you from doing this or doing that, or you can move in some form or another. Obviously, if an injury is horrific, then you're not going to be able to do much. But finding out a way of how you can work around your injury to be able to do this is something that has helped me.
I think the only one thing I'd add to that is, as hard as this is, trying to let go of the past. I think with injury, we often get caught in comparison to our former selves, and that can be really demotivating, demoralizing. For example, you pull a muscle in your leg or you injure your knee, and you're looking at your squat numbers now, and they're not even 50% of what you were doing 6 months ago, and we use that as a determinant of success. The quote we all use it is that comparison is a thief of all joy, and sometimes we're our own worst enemies in comparing ourselves to our former selves. So always try to tell myself and folks who are going through injury, don't compare apples and oranges. Your current situation is completely different to where you were before. Just be 100% present and focus on this is a clean slate now. Let's start from the ground and build up, and try to let go of comparison to others and to our former selves.
Nice.
If not fitness, what job would you have pursued?
Well, I want to say that my number one dream was always to be a professional athlete.
Oh, that's fitness. We've had
It's
this
not
argument,
fitness,
and
that's
I'm
sport.
saying that's fitness.
Is it fitness?
It is. So give me another option.
Well, then I'd be a musician. When I say musician, I mean I want to be on a stage.
Like a high up.
Like I want to be. I don't know why would Justin Bieber pop in the head.
Yes. Yes. That's on the podcast now for
I
everyone.
don't want to be Bieber. It's just, I want to be. I don't know. I want to be like Manfred Kiedis of Red Hot Chili Peppers.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
And yourself, Patty?
Probably an actor.
We can see that.
Yeah.
An actor would be pretty good to be an actor.
Yeah, but being a failed actor wouldn't be cool.
No, that wouldn't.
It's a hard slog.
Being an Oscar winner would be cool.
Okay, next question, a little bit less light. How do you deal with clients who know better than you?
Patrick.
So I not necessarily just clients, but like other coaches and people that you're discussing training with or whatever. It's not necessarily a case of people maybe knowing better than you. And something that we talk about all the time is that there are a million ways to skin a cat, which is a weird saying, by the way, because there aren't a lot of ways to skin a
I
cat.
don't know if anyone's ever skinned a cat first anyway.
Don't skin a cat, they're nice animals. Be nice.
Didn't you watch Don't F with Cat?
Yeah, you didn't skin it.
That's true.
We didn't
Anyway,
see how he skinned it.
we digress. There are so many ways to be able to go about something, and one of the values that we have here is about responding well to feedback, how you can absorb feedback and how you can take feedback, and how you can give out feedback as well. And you never, like someone that has got no understanding of training or whatever it is, or no qualifications or no experience, may be able to have an insight on something that you haven't thought of. And one thing, what we're trying to create, or what we are doing, creating a culture where as coaches we want everyone to be able to just jump in and say what they feel, or have you tried doing this? And I would encourage people that are, if they think they've got something valuable to add, then add it and take on the feedback and then process it, rather than necessarily like snapping at someone and saying, oh no, you don't know best, I know best.
Yeah, I think there's three things that pop to mind. I think the first thing is that we're making the assumption in this question that the coach feels that the client knows more about them at their job as a coach. Because I would argue that most of my clients do know more than me in many aspects of life, but I'd like to think that perhaps I'm more knowledgeable within the realm of fitness and coaching. So that's the first one. I think the biggest thing that I think about here is that I want to get to the root cause of why someone may be feeling that way. And so, that comes into the assessment process, but, perhaps this person, and it might not even be personal, perhaps this person has worked with coaches in the past who, that person lost trust in their fitness professional because he was given poor advice, or, the program wasn't explained to him, or him or her. So I think getting to the bottom of why a person feels a certain way, I think is really, really important. And then I think the next question is that, we have to take ownership as a coach. If we're in a position where we're working with a client, and the client is perhaps not trusting in what we're giving them, they're questioning everything that we're doing. The first question I would do is look at myself and say, what have I done that's not set this client up to actually trust in what I'm doing? And this comes back to so many things we talk about the podcast all the time. Was I clear in explaining the intention of what this program was about? So many people, we talk about this all the time, so many people leave programs or leave coaches because what they were promised they would receive doesn't align with what they actually received. And so much of that comes into the messaging, so much of that comes into the intention and what that client thinks they're going to get. And if we can't provide what that client thinks they're going to get, then they have every right not to trust us. So I think, first one would be like, take ownership as a coach. What can you do better to instill trust and faith in that client in that journey? And there can be a million different things there.
Cool. Let's end with.
That wasn't a quick fire, by the way.
Yeah, that wasn't. Let's end with, are you currently working with any training coach or mentor?
So I don't have, I worked with a coach for 7 years. I've had him on the podcast many times. Still a great friend of mine, Carl Ruth. I recently parted ways with him after the 2021 CrossFit season, and now I'm following the Process Program and Compete program. But recently, as of yesterday, I've hired a skipping coach and I did this because Ant did it, and I thought it was interesting. It's something I've always struggled with double unders. Actually, I struggle with double unders as an athlete, as in like high rep double unders just doesn't work well with me. And I've tried to address it many times myself over the years, but I don't really feel like I've made much headway. I'm constantly going back and forth with different techniques and trying different things, and nothing really seems to be sticking. And then, Patrick rocks up to the gym with a broken ankle and he's got Vans on and he's doing 250 unbroken double unders, and I'm like, okay, Ed, there's still work to be done. So I just hired a skipping coach. So I'm working with her for, I think it's 4 weeks. Actually, it started with a bit of an assessment process, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to that whole process. I think I'll finally be better than Paddy and Providers and Izzy.
I'm not actually working with a coach at the moment. Well, I mean, you could argue that I am because I'm following the process programming.
I am my own coach.
Yes, or I mean, essentially Ed is overseeing it. But yeah, no, it's actually really nice to, having written my own training for extended periods of time and having had nutritionists in the past, etc. It's quite nice to take the reins on the nutrition myself, and also to be part of a community at process programming where you can have a look at the leaderboard and stuff like that. And that is, I find, a big thing for me. I think this is why a lot of people come to us and go for those like large group training things, is to be able to be part of a community and feel like they're part of something rather than just their own training. And that's something that I enjoy at the moment, whether it's actually just jumping in on class and doing what the class is, not having to think about, oh, do I need to do this today, do I need to do that today, or whether it's just being able to enjoy doing the training and not have to worry too much about what's going on.
Izzy?
Yes, you're my coach.
You also have nutrition.
And I also have a nutritionist, which I've been working, especially this last 7 months as I became veggie and just figuring myself out, my body comp out, our new training and our goals, and yep, always working with Ed. And I think I get mentored and coached by everyone in this facility, all the coaches around us. I learn from you guys every day, from our operations team, from Nick, from you. So I think we're lucky to be in an environment where we all learn and grow from each other, because we all have different strengths and specialties, and we all are eager to grow ourselves and be better than ourselves. And I think it's something that's great about our job.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say the same for me. I feel like I get mentored by my team all the time. And like you said, with the coaching team, there's different skill sets, different areas of interest where people have kind of done a deep dive on, and perhaps they're actually more knowledgeable than me on certain things. And obviously within operations of business, you've got a really strong team, yourself, Nick, and the rest of the ladies, that it's like, you're always learning. It's awesome.
Well, this has been really fun, guys. I actually really enjoyed this.
Actually.
Yeah, wasn't really sure, as I spent the whole day with you guys already. I was like, another hour.
And you're on a massive mushroom come down.
Yeah.
Not magic mushroom.
Not that shower really helped. So if you ever feel on a come down, just go hop in a cold shower. Yeah, you're disgusting. Anyways, guys, thanks for joining me on this Q&A, and thank you for everyone for sending in their questions. These were some really good questions, very interesting, and we're definitely going to do this one again soon. Have a lovely day.
Bye.
Bye. Was that bad? That was good.
That was
That
fun.
was really good. I just am tired.
That was fun doing
That was
it.
really fun, actually.
I was the first time that a Q&A was
I was
so
able
fast.
to group them that quick. Did
Yeah, that
you
was
see
good.
how quick my brain worked?
Paddy, intro.
Yeah.
Alright.
Ready?
Are you not going to do the intro?
No.
You did the
You
intro.
gotta go,
No, you
right?
do it.
You
No.
were talking.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Yeah.
got to go. Oh, I see.
No, I'm okay.
Come on, you do the intro then. Yes.
No, I don't want to do it.
No, you have to do it.
No, I don't want to do it.
You're the only
You're
person that
the
hasn't done an intro yet.
No, I don't want to do it.
Is he?
I've done more than enough for the day.
Okay, Patrick.